All right. So today we're doing a review of cell transport. There's a couple of things you need to make sure you know going into the test is that you can recognize the three main characteristics of passive transport and active transport, and just make sure you can tell me the difference between them as well as being able to diagram and label the plasma membrane. So what we're going to do is just go through several questions together, look at these questions, and try to determine how we can use our knowledge to answer these questions. So, number one says, transmembrane proteins span the width of the cell membrane. Four types of transmembrane proteins are shown in a section of the cell membrane. So, we're looking at proteins are shown in a cell membrane. And then it asks us, although these proteins have different specific functions, they all ... So they are different, but do what? So let's look at these really quick. It shows us our different proteins. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Some of these we've seen before, right? Like this one, we can say we've seen this one. This one's a little bit confusing, but we know that proteins all do one thing. This one is actually the facilitated diffusion one, which we know is a channel protein, and it lets things into and out of the cell. So I'm going to write that down. So they are helping molecules in and out of the cell. So let's go over here and let's see which one of these answer choices best fits into what I am saying. A says stop chemical reactions in the cell. I know that doesn't fit at all what I'm saying. B says synthesize molecules that signal other cells. This one's tripped up a lot of people today. Synthesize means to create. And we know the cell membrane doesn't create molecules, so we can go ahead and get rid of that one. C says help the cell interact with its environment. Interact with its environment. That's kind of a confusing way to answer this question, but I'm not necessarily against it yet. But interact with the environment would mean to really change based on the environment around it. So whether it's letting things into or out of the cell, whether it's letting water in because it's a bigger environment, or a water environment outside of it, so it lets water in, different things. This could be the answer, not sure yet. D says removes large waste particles from the cytoplasm of the cell. So it says removes large waste particles, which that would be transport. However, because it says the word removes, and I know that over here I can see that it's actually letting things in, that doesn't best describe it. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to go with C. To help the cell interact with its environment by letting particles in and out and trying to reach that homeostasis, trying to reach that equilibrium, which we remember that means balance within the cell. I always say homeostasis keeps us happy and healthy. All right, number 2. An animal cell. Well, oh wait, hold on. Alright, an animal cell that is surrounded by fresh water will burst because osmotic pressure causes, let's circle our keywords. I've got surrounded by fresh water. I've got that it's going to burst, which is just another fancy word for swell or get bigger. And then I see because of osmotic pressure, which when I see osmosis, I should immediately think H2O osmosis or water. So, over here I've got my image. It tells me that the cell is swelling, exactly what I wrote. I can also see the term burst. I also see that this is a hypotonic solution, a hypo-hippo. And hippos are swollen and bigger, so I'm going to be looking for the one that says it's going to get bigger. And if I remember that when a cell gets bigger, it's because the water is moving into the cell. That's a terrible arrow. I'm going to redraw it. for you? Because water's going in. So we're looking for water to go in. So water to move into the cell. That is what I'm looking for. This is most likely it. Waste to move out of the cell. That's going out. Solutes to move into the cell. So I'm seeing the in two words, so I'm not going to count it out yet. Or D, solutes, particles to move out of, so I can cross that out. So now I'm down to water to move into the cell and solutes to move into the cell. Well, because of this word osmotic pressure, I know that I'm looking for water. This one says water, this one says solutes. I can cross this one off. Go with my answer A. Oh, no. All right. What process is being used by the cell to move molecules from outside the cell to inside the cell in this picture? So we're looking for what process is being used. Over here, I can see my molecules. I can see they're going through this thing. I can see this is a protein right here. I can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 particles outside and only 1, 2, 3, 4 particles on this side, so we're moving from high to low. So this is going to be a type of passive transport. And the biggest thing is that I see here that there is this protein being used. So I'm actually immediately going to know I'm looking for facilitated diffusion, which is going to be D. Yes, that's a type of passive transport, but we want to be the most specific, so I can go with facilitated. There's no energy because it's high to low, and it's not water. In fact, it says molecules here. Facilitated diffusion. This one, as soon as you see protein, as soon as you see channel protein being used, you should immediately think facilitated diffusion. Number 4, substances that are too large to pass through pores of a cell membrane may enter the cell by using energy through a process known as, I can see the word energy, and as soon as I see using energy through a process, I can just go straight and find, I'm going to write active transport because I always write what I'm thinking before I go find the answer. So active transport. And then I'm going to go find the answer that I've written down. If it's there, A, diffusion, B, active transport. My other options are passive, which I know is wrong, and D is wrong too because they don't use energy. All right, so what will happen to the cell in the diagram below? So I'm looking for what will happen to the cell. That's my question. I come down here. I've got 3 steps. Let's start with 1. Number 1 is, do I know the water? So I'm going to put water question mark. So step 1, do I know the water percentage? Right here I have 5% starch, 10% starch. I do not. I don't want this. I want to know what is the H2O percentage. Remember, this is really easy. I take my 5%, I say 100 minus 5. I got this 5 from right here. 100 minus 5 is going to give me 95 H2O. Now, I can get rid of this 5% starch because I don't need it. Down here, I have 10% starch. I know that 100 minus 10% is going to give me 90% water. So let's go ahead and fill in what we got. So we got 95 on the inside, 90 on the outside. My second step is circle my big number. So coming down here, I've got 95, I've got 90, my bigger number is 95. And my third step is to draw the arrow away. So I'm going to draw the arrow away from my circle. So I know the water is moving out. I know that this is going to shrink. And if it asks, I know this is hypertonic. Let's go look at my answer choices, try to fit this to what I just wrote down. A says starch will enter the cell, causing it to swell. Swell is not what I want. Starch will exit the cell, causing it to shrink. Shrink is what I want. Water will enter the cell, causing it to swell. Swell is not what I want. And water will leave the cell, causing it to shrink. I do want shrink. So I'm between B and D right now. My biggest difference is that this one says starch and this one says water. Well, I know that when we are looking at a cell inside of water, that we are looking at the process of osmosis. And we know that osmosis is the movement of water. So I can go ahead, get rid of my starch, come down here and circle D. Water will leave the cell, causing it to shrink. What process is being shown in the diagram below? So again, I'm looking for process. So what process is this? I come down here, I see all these little things, I see them moving out. I see that it is going from high to low as they move, so this is going to be a type of passive because it's going from high to low. So now I just need to decide if this is diffusion or osmosis. I'm going to go with these are particles moving. So this is going to be diffusion because it's particles moving. And then I actually can keep up my same information because it asked me, is this passive or active transport? Well, I already wrote that because we're moving from high to low, this is passive transport. I also know that diffusion, which we said was the answer, diffusion is one of the two types of passive transport between osmosis and diffusion. So we are good there. Alright, we have another osmosis problem here. It says the picture shows a cell model and the solutions associated with it. In this situation, the cell will what? I've got 98% water in the cell. I've got 95% water outside the cell. I'm going to circle my bigger number, which is 98. It's going to move out, which means it's going to shrink in size. Let's go over here, see if we can find that answer. I've got gain, I've got shrink, that's what I'm looking for. Increase in solute content. If it increases in, we know the solute can't change because solute can't move through the membrane, so that's never going to change and dissolve completely. That would be really bad for our cells if our membranes dissolved completely. Number 9 says, look at the lab setup below. Some students use vinegar to dissolve away the shells of their eggs and use these eggs as models of human red blood cells. The students observed these changes in the eggs when they placed them in different solutions. Below are the results of the experiment. Which statement best describes the role of the cell membrane in this experiment? So we're looking for what is the role of the cell membrane. Over here I see 3 different experiments. One where it's not changing, so water is going in and water is going out. One where water is very clearly going in, and one where water is very clearly going out. So I'm looking for to let water in or let water out is probably what I'm looking for. So to allow things in and out. Let's go look at my answer choices, see if I can use that information. A says the cell membrane is an impermeable barrier that prevents water from entering the cell. I know that because it's preventing water from entering, that is wrong because water is obviously going in and out. We also know that in osmosis, water is able to move through the cell membrane. B says the cell membrane allows solutes to enter the cell. So it allows solutes to enter the cell, which causes the cell to shrink. There's a couple problems with this one. Number one, we know on osmosis, solutes don't enter the cell, but water does. So I can go ahead and cross that out. C says the cell membrane allows water to enter and leave. And that pretty much fits. It allows water to enter and leave. I've got water entering and leaving on the left, water entering here, and water leaving here. So C is our answer. We have another osmosis problem now. In this one, what will happen to the cell shown in the diagram? Again, remember my steps is, do I have the water percentage? And if I look down here, I have 60% water. I can get rid of that starch. I don't need it. And 70% water. I can get rid of this. I don't need it. Second, I can find my bigger number. I'll write out number. So find my big number, 60, 70. 70 is bigger. And third, arrow away from the big number. So I'm going to draw my arrow this time into the cell. Because it's going into the cell, it's going to swell. So I can go over here. A says swell, that's what I'm looking for. B says stay the same. Absorb too much starch, that can't happen. And shrink is wrong. Swell. This one's a tough one because we don't really talk much about vesicles. So this is one of those that's really good practice for how to read a question and interpret a diagram. And it says, which statement best explains the function of the vesicles? So I'm looking for what is the function of the vesicles. So let's come down here. First I'm going to find my vesicles, are these guys right here. I'm going to see that here's my Golgi body. They seem to be moving away from it all the way out here to this thing right here, which looks as if this is the plasma membrane. So it looks like the vesicles are going from inside the cell to outside the cell. So there's some kind of transport going on. A says, delivering packaged materials to the Golgi apparatus for protein synthesis. It says to the Golgi, which they're going away from, so not it. Transport packaged molecules from the Golgi apparatus to be released outside of the cell. So from Golgi apparatus to be released. That could be it. Exchanging genetic information between Golgi apparatus of several different cells. We don't see any genetic information in there. I'm just going to get rid of that. Go back to my answer B. Knowing nothing about vesicles, I was able to find that answer just by looking at the diagram. How is a cell able to stay the same in the environment it is currently in? So it says, how is cell A able to stay in the environment it's currently in? Let's circle cell A, look at what's happening. There's water going in, there's water going out. Let's go read my answer choices. Water moves out of the cell at a greater rate than into the cell. It's moving in at the same rate. There's no greater rate. The greater rate would be cell, this one. So this would be A. The net movement into and out of the cell is equal. I see equal, I see net movement. Remember, net movement means the added up, how much are you losing and how much are you gaining at the same time. So this might be it. C says water moves into the cell at a greater rate than out of the cell. Again, you're seeing water moving into, oops, I said this wrong. This one would be reference to C and A, but we're looking for cell A. And D says the salinity causes the cell to shrink. It's not shrinking. I'm going to go back to my answer B. The net movement into and out of the cell is equal. I can see water going in. I can see water going out. It is equal. Okay, I think this time we're good. Which of the following best describes the difference between osmosis and diffusion? So I'm just looking for the difference between osmosis and diffusion. So I know that they are both very similar because they're both passive transport. Well, here, let me write that off to the side. So anything that applies to passive transport is not going to be a difference, but I do need to make sure that I'm not putting something that does not describe passive transport when I go look at differences. Now, I know that the difference between osmosis and diffusion is that osmosis is H2O osmosis, meaning it's the movement of water, while diffusion is the movement of particles. So, let's read through. Diffusion is the movement of molecules from low to high concentration, and osmosis is the movement of molecules from high to low. So this is saying that diffusion is from low to high, while osmosis is high to low. Well, as we already said, both are passive transport. This describes active, so I can go ahead and get rid of this. B says diffusion requires energy, but osmosis does not. Again, this describes active transport, but they are both passive, so this is not going to be the answer either. C says diffusion is the movement of particles from high to low, so movement of particles from high to low, and osmosis is specifically the movement of water from high to low. So they're both high to low, except for this one says osmosis is the movement of water, diffusion is the movement of particles. This checks out. I'm going to circle C. Diffusion, just to check, let's check D. Diffusion and osmosis are the same thing. I know that's not true. I can cross out D. (14) A student is analyzing samples of red blood cells using a microscope. The student's observations are shown below. It says, the student observes that the shape of cell A appears normal, while cell B appears swollen. So they're saying that this one swells. And cell C appears to have shrunk, so this one shrinks. I'm going to go ahead and label this one as equal. Okay, the question says the swelling that occurred in cell B indicates that, okay, so I'm looking at cell B. There's a lot that cell B could indicate, so let's go through the questions, or the answer choices, just to see what they're looking for. A says higher concentration of water inside the cell than out. B says an equal concentration of water inside the cell than outside. C says higher concentration of water outside the cell than in. So based off these, they're looking for, is the water higher on the outside or inside? So I know that I'm looking at osmosis because it's water movement into and out of the cell. I know that osmosis is passive transport. And I know that in passive transport, we're always looking from high to low. So I'm looking for which side is going to be higher when we're trying to get it into the cell. Well, let's just go over here. I know that I want the water to travel in because it's swelling, so I'm going to draw an arrow in, and then I'm just going to put my high to low on the other side. High to low, meaning that the water concentration should be higher on the outside of the cell. So let's go see which one says that. A says higher concentration of water inside the cell, so not A. B says an equal concentration, not B. C says higher concentration of water outside the cell. So that's what I'm looking for, just to check D just in case. More oxygen inside the cell than what can be utilized. That has nothing to do with osmosis, so we can move on from that. The answer is C. Alright, this one. The plasma membrane is mostly made up of, and then it gives us a fancy picture of the plasma membrane. Over here. And luckily I can use this to kind of help myself remember, but this is going to be a very knowledge-based question, meaning it's best to try to have this memorized for the test. You are going to need to have this memorized. The cell membrane or plasma membrane, as we know, is mostly a lipid, but as we have learned in this unit, there are also a lot of protein in there. So I can go ahead and come over here and circle D. It even tells us right here on the picture, lipids, proteins. Let me make sure we're still recording, because my worst nightmare is that I do this again and we are not. Okay, we are still recording. Cool. Alright, so this one is going to be one where it is so important to draw pictures, and I'm going to show you why. When I read this, you're going to be kind of mind blown, because it's kind of a difficult, a lot of reading, a lot of information that's just barely wedged in there, and this is where getting to draw it out is really going to help us. So, 16 says, in order to survive in their environment, saltwater fish can filter out the saline in the water. Saline is salt. This means saltwater fish have more salt in their blood than water, which means they have less room in their cells for water. Important parts. They have more salt in their blood than water. Okay. The question says, which of the following statements best explains why a freshwater aquarium that has almost no salt would be a dangerous habitat for a saltwater fish? So it is a freshwater aquarium with no salt. I'm going to draw it out. Here's my aquarium. Here's my little fish. I've got to figure out what is high and what is low. So I'm going to go up here to what I underlined. This says the fish has more salt in their blood. So in terms of water, if there's more salt, that means there's going to be less water. In comparison, the aquarium has almost no salt. So less salt means more water. So, breaking that down, if the fish has more salt, they have high amounts. If they have more salt, they have low amounts of water. Whereas in the aquarium, if they have low salt, they have a high amount of water. As always, if we're talking about the movement of water, this is osmosis. In osmosis, we are looking at passive transport. In passive transport, we move from high to low. So I'm going to draw my arrow from high to low. So it's going to go in the fish and cause the fish to swell. Let's check my answer choices for something that fits my thoughts. A says their cells would absorb too much oxygen. I'm looking for water, not A. B says their cells would gain too much water and burst. Gain too much water and burst, most likely. This is what I'm going for, but just to check, C says their cell would lose too much water and shrink. Opposite of what I want, the answer is B. Alright, which cells must use ATP energy to move the molecule out of the cell? I'm immediately going to circle use ATP, and I'm immediately going to see use ATP and write active. So it wants me to decide, is cell A active or is cell B active, or both? So I got to be able to look at these and decide. Now they don't give me much to go on, they give me the number of dots, which means I'm going to think about probably that it's going to be the movement of the particles from low to high or high to low, depending on which. So let's go ahead and read our hint and see what it says. The hint says, remember, when the cell is using energy, it will move substances from low to high. When the cell is not using energy, it will move substances from high to low. So it's saying that active is going to be low to high, and that's what we're going to look for. So looking at this pic, what do you notice about the amount of particles? So let's label this. Inside the cell, on cell A, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 dots. 4 particles. On the outside, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 particles. Well, I know that 10 is going to be labeled as my higher one, 4 is going to be labeled as my lower one, and here's the crazy part, it's moving from high to low. So definitely cell A, check. Let's check cell B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 particles inside the cell, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 particles outside the cell. So this is going to be labeled as high, this is going to be labeled as low, the 5 is going to be labeled as low, 9 is high, it's going to go from high to low, So from 9 to 5, meaning this one is going to be passive. So the answer is going to be cell A only, which is A. All right. In this solution, the cell will. All right, we're looking at another cell in a solution. So this is another osmosis problem. I remember that in osmosis, we're looking for this water to move from high to low. And we're looking for water. So let's go through our 3 steps. Number 1, I got to find my water. Now it's either going to be there or I'm going to have to use math and figure it out. But luckily, it's right here, 95% water. I'm going to get rid of this. I don't need it. I don't need that. Over here, I have 5% H2O. So again, I don't have to do math. I can get rid of this. Now, number 2 says circle the big number. So let's go find my big number, 95.5. 95 is bigger. And 3, draw arrow away, because away is high to low. So the water will move from high, which is the 95, to low, which is the 5. So the water is going to move out, and the cell is going to shrink. Which leaves us with the answer A, shrink. Number 19, spraying perfume is an example of what type of passive transport? If it's passive transport, then I know that this is either going to be osmosis, diffusion, or facilitated diffusion. I can cross off anything that is not those things. I know that I'm looking for osmosis is the movement of water. I know diffusion is the movement of particles. And so I just have to decide which one perfume is. Now perfume smells really funny, so it's got a whole lot of particles in it. Water doesn't smell funny. I'm going to go with D, diffusion. Alright, number 20. Water is a charged molecule, so it cannot get through the lipid part of the bilayer. In order to allow water to move in and out, cells have special proteins that act as a passageway into the cell. The movement of water in the cell is known as, all this is asking for, all this is useless. It's just asking us the movement of water in and out of the cell is known as what? I know the movement of water is H2O osmosis. So the one that describes osmosis is C. Number 21, cells must take in water and nutrients and get rid of waste. The cell organelle that is directly involved in the transport of water, nutrients, and waste is shown above and is known as the, all at once, is the organelle that is directly involved in transport. I know that very easily off the top of my head. It is my plasma, otherwise known as my cell membrane. And my answer choice that corresponds to that is the C. Now, don't be the person that gets tripped up on the cell wall. The cell wall is not the main one that does this. Every cell has a plasma membrane, so it is always the last line of defense of letting things in and out of the cell. You're always going to go with the plasma membrane on this question. All right. A sugar cube is added to a beaker of warm water and allowed to sit for a few hours. The results are shown in the diagram below. use the following diagram to answer the question. The process shown in the diagram above is known as, so I just want to know what process is shown. Right here I've got my sugar cube, it's dropped into the water, the sugar cube molecules spread out. So, I know no energy is involved because there's nothing going on. I can see it spreading out from high to low because there's a high concentration here, low concentration here, it spreads out. The biggest thing I need to know is this the movement of water or is it the movement of particles? Well, if I look at it, once it's dropped in, the water doesn't move, but the particles all spread out from that sugar. So that's going to tell me that because this is the movement of particles, I'm going to go with diffusion. Remember, osmosis is the movement of water, diffusion is the movement of particles. Just because there is water involved doesn't necessarily mean it's osmosis. You have to look at what particle or what molecule is actually moving. Is it that particles of sugar in this case, or is it that molecule of water? And the last question just asked, is diffusion active or passive? Well, we talked about it a second ago. We saw diffusion was going from high to low. Because it's going from high to low, I can determine that this is passive transport. Don't forget your test is Wednesday. If you are somebody who is having to take your test online, don't forget you need to be logged in during the class time for that test. As always, we are here if you need us, and good luck.